Thank you everyone for joining our board-to-board interview series with my good friend here, Peter Chu. He's the board member out at Siva Logistics. He's been a managing partner at AsiaTech Ventures, and he was a former BroadVision VP of Strategy and CFO, and also the former chairman of Monte Jade West, my former successors. My name is David Jang, chairman of Monte Jade West, and I'm a pleasure to have you guys all join us today. I'd like to take this moment to note the passing of Ruth Bader Ginsburg. America lost one of the most extraordinary justices ever to have served on the Supreme Court. She was a magnificent judge, a brilliant lawyer. She fought with fierce devotion for fairness and equality, and she had boundless courage in the face of adversity. She has had notable landmark opinions that has helped shape and advance gender equality, marriage equality, the rights of people with disabilities, and the rights of immigrants. Many of those changes have actually impacted many of the community members here within Monte Jade as well. This is a great loss for our country, and our condolences go out to her and her children and the many people that she taught and inspired. At this current time, I'd like to remind our audience that this video, this recording today, this event is recorded. Please feel free to use the Q&A function within the Zoom. So it's at the bottom segment of your Zoom panel. Feel free to use the chat to say hi to some friends. If you have any questions for the moderator or need some support, please raise your hand with the raise your hand function. And for the best experience, please toggle from gallery view, toggle to gallery view. Monte Jade was founded in 1989 by immigrants from Asia. They bonded together to support one another because they were under-networked and under-resourced. Through this community, billions of dollars of enterprise value was created and hundreds of companies were formed. Even to this day, Monte Jade is focused on building community. We do this today under 3 pillars. The first pillar are our interview series such as this that celebrate notable community leaders through understanding their personal journey and how they overcame many of the challenges that they faced. This focus on journey helps us better connect to great people so the next generation of leaders can learn. The second pillar is focused on technology forums in which we bring together our community, new ideas to understand. This enables our community to find the opportunities for better investments or to advance their careers. Recently, we've held talks on venture investing, AI, biosciences, and upcoming, we will have one on the communication sector as well. The last but most important pillar is our mentorship program. This is a volunteer-run program focused on helping build the skill sets needed of future leaders. Eastern Asians are underrepresented in the leadership of many Bay Area technology companies, and today Asians continue to lag their peers in being promoted. White males are promoted at 2 times the rate of Asian males, while white females are promoted at 3 times the rate of Asian females. This disparity has gotten worse over the last 2 decades, and our mentorship program strives to help address this inequality. The 6-month-long mentorship program focuses on education and deep engagement with small mentor families to help address some of the challenges of moving up the corporate ladder. We have just started we have completed our open houses for this year. And if you know anyone that's interested, please let us know and we'll see if we can slot you in for this year still. I was a mentee in 2011 and it was an eye-opening experience. And Peter Chu was one of the people that actually inspired me to continue my volunteering service. So please, if you know anyone or are interested in our mentorship program, please let us know. And last but not least here, I'd like to thank our virtual sponsors. It is with their great support that we are able to continue this great work and provide programs to our community. If you are interested in being a sponsor for Monte Jade, please contact us through the website, or you can send me an email as well. And you can find me also on the website as well. Deloitte, VenturePack Law, and Silicon Motion, New York Life, and Most have been great supporters in our virtual series that you see here today. And also our annual sponsors, which when we can have physical events, you can see on the right, UMC and Deloitte have been great sponsors for us over the last decade or so, and we continue to thank them for their ongoing support. At this turn time, I get the great pleasure of introducing Peter Chu. I'm going to actually read a letter or a blurb from his daughter. So his daughter's put together a great introduction for Peter, and here it goes. Peter Chu is an entrepreneur, venture capitalist, and strategic advisor with experience in leading startup, growth, and public companies. He is currently engaged with a handful of startups and growth companies in the US, Asia, and Europe. Additionally, he is an active mentor to Silicon Valley professionals and serves in advisory roles to community groups and local educational institutions. Operating in companies such as BroadVision, Oracle, and AsiaTech, Peter became adept at solving complex problems, building teams and processes, and delivering products. Additionally, he has advised startups and multinational corporations on product and marketing strategy, M&A, and investments. Peter feels fortunate to have worked alongside very talented people throughout his journey in Silicon Valley and abroad, and looks forward to meeting many more. Peter is passionate about building teams and communities to develop and engage and energize people to pursue purposeful work and a happy life. Always seeking out teams with purpose, talent, and outstanding leadership, because that's where fun and amazing things happen. For his next adventure, he is leading a team to build knowledge networks while advising a couple of other teams in digital transformation, green tech, and education. Peter holds an engineering degree from Stanford University, and it was at Stanford that he discovered his interest in building teams, communities, and student and university organizations. He received his MBA degree from Harvard Business School, where he was awarded the Dean's Service Award for Leadership and Service. He has been a member of Monte Jade for 30 years and has served as chairman of Monte Jade West, 25 West, served as chairman of Monte Jade West. 25 years ago, he helped form its young professional chapter, MJAA, and he stays actively engaged as a board advisor and mentor to the Asian American professional community. Peter has held leadership roles in other Bay Area professional organizations, such as Harvard Business School alumni, AAMA, and CSPA, and has guest lectured at Stanford and UC Berkeley. Peter lives in Silicon Valley with his wife and 2 daughters. Peter loves to travel, read, and wants to study cognitive science and enjoys keeping up with friends from around the world. Peter, welcome.
Hello, David. What a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great. I'm really glad we could make this happen. Thank you so much for taking the time, especially on our first fresh air weekend in almost a month. It's been a crazy month.
I know. It has been, crazy month, crazy half a year, crazy year. It's all of that, isn't it?
It is really all of that. It's been very, very hectic. I'm hoping that 2020 concludes soon and it doesn't get any worse than it currently is right now. So,
well, it's good to see you. I mean, I wish we could do this in person because I think I really appreciated the friendship you extended. We started by working together, volunteering together, but I think that has really blossomed just because there's so many great ideas coming out of it. You mentioned earlier that I brought you along on sort of the volunteering track. To be honest, you opened my eye to how do we get people engaged and talk about how do we bring purpose and sort of social awareness to, so I think it's been a mutual relationship. I really appreciate sort of having you in my life.
Well, that's very, very kind. I'm really happy that we have built an amazing friendship over the last few years, almost a decade now, which is kind of crazy to think about.
Just a few.
And it's amazing. It's been amazing to work with you and continue to work with you. I want to kind of focus first here on your journey, which is, where did you immigrate from? Like, what brought you here to the U.S.? Like, I'd love to hear your story here.
Well, I was born in Taiwan, but because of my father's occupation, he was a journalist, a foreign correspondent. So he was stationed in a lot of different places, and I was fortunate, or maybe given the challenge, to have lived in Korea, Africa, Japan, and the US. So the US was sort of the last place that I came to. But before that, my elementary school, I think this is what got me into college. Just one sentence that said, I went to 6 elementary schools in 5 languages, in 4 languages, in 5 countries. So the 654 thing. It presented a challenge for me. I think for me, that was felt very discombobulated. But at the same time, I had to find a way. And it was, having been here after coming to the US at the end of elementary school, my father was on the move again 4 years later. But I requested that if I could stay in the country, because my reason was this is the first language that I learned how to actually write an essay. So if I can actually stay with this, I might be able to finish my education. It was very difficult. We talked about this for a long time. It wasn't the thing to do, but they finally gave me permission. So I pretty much stayed around with the help of some extended families for, back all the way through high school. And then since then, it's been engineering and business, So background is I'm Chinese, but grew up in a lot of different places. And I think it's, I like to think of myself as fortunate enough to have been exposed to a lot of global culture, people, different way of doing things. And that brings for me, the one attribute that I learned is adaptability. And that has, I think, served me very, very well in a lot of different occasions.
That's great. I really can't understand how a teenager convinced their parents like, oh, this is going to be a great idea. I should stay here. You guys continue to move on. Was there one thing that tipped the scales, or is it kind of like a multitude of different things that allowed you to convince them?
And to be fair, because we moved around so much, I think I had not been away from the family for more than one night. I did one overnight trip when I was like 9 with my uncle. So this is a family that hasn't, I never went to summer camp. This is not the Chinese thing, right? So for me to even come up with that, I thought, I think it was a lot of the stories that I grew up with. My father has a large collection of Chinese, call it just heroic stories of you have to put yourself through hardship in order to make something of yourself. I don't know, as a teenager, I thought maybe that's one of the hard challenges that I had to face. And I stuck to that idea and said, the US was thought as the best place to get higher education. And I didn't know much about it, but I knew that was maybe the case. And I knew I wanted it. And there was a lot of, actually, to be fair, arguments and fights. It was not supported by my parents. And also because my father worked for a Taiwan entity. Therefore, economics was an issue. How do you support a kid in the US where the cost of living is that greatly different? So we overcame all that, and I think they really did support me through that. And for me, I think it was the right decision.
That's a pretty amazing story there. When you made that decision, what were some of your biggest fears? Like, I mean, you're effectively alone in this country. Not technically, you had some support, yes, but you're effectively alone from like the parents that really supported you as you were growing up. And what made you feel more comfortable, or what made it feel more normal, so to speak?
I think what made me uncomfortable was that I felt vulnerable. I wasn't like everybody else. Being on a student visa back then is a long time ago. They told me a lot about if you do this, you could be thrown out of the country anytime. So, and also the status was, I don't think even understood enough of how do I even stay longer than just finishing high school, right? That wasn't part of my horizon. But I did, what I did have was I had a couple of very good friends, which I was able to build that relationship. Maybe at that age, I don't know, 14, 15, that was a very, very solid support. The other was I was also fortunately exposed to some local program. I actually went to a disadvantaged school in LAUSD. So, we call it a combat zone school. Therefore, they had outreach from places like Caltech. They brought me into a summer program, and I was just inspired to say, wow, came out of nowhere, and there's some very intelligent people who's showing me places where Millikan, Feynman, all these great people did great things. And that gave me a chance, since I have some toehold in these things, or I have some connection, I can't even say toehold. I thought maybe that's my ticket. Maybe I can do something with that. I think it's hope. I think it's friendship. Those are the two things that overcame, my lack of appreciation for really the obstacles ahead of me.
That's amazing. And I know you had said kind of adaptability is what you really picked up like during these formative years. Was there any other kind of skills or traits that because of these struggles that you kind of picked up? Like, was there you talked about kind of resilience there, right? Just continuing nonstop and just keeping the push.
I think that's the resilience, a really, really good word. I use it a lot of times, but it's not just resilience. I think it's sort of I always felt that I was disadvantaged because as a foreign student, I couldn't get financial aid in most of the foreign people could get. I couldn't work. Right? You have to be given special permission. So how do I do the things other people can do? How do I get resources? And so always felt this event. I remember when I first came to the country, within the first year, I guess I was always kind of interested in new things. I was in the accelerated math class in the 7th grade, first year of junior high school. I asked my math teacher, how do all these other kids, I see them for math class, I don't see them for the rest of the day. Oh, they're part of the gifted track. I said, how can I get into that? She said, you're still in ESL English. Don't even think about this, right? And for me, when somebody tells me that other people are doing it, but you can't do it, that position of disadvantage actually fires up something in me that says, I want to get there. I don't care how long it takes. And surely enough, I was able to follow on their tracks within a year and a half. And so I think it's resilience, but it's about taking that challenge and say, you know what, I don't know if I can make it, but I'm going to give it all I've got. And I've done, I mean, in my life, I had to say, I've been lucky, but I've also been handed plenty of challenges. But it's during the challenges, you got to pick up your head and say, I could either sit here and mope and complain about what I don't have, or just really go at it and see if I can get somewhere. And to get somewhere usually got me somewhere.
That's great. So you went from LA and then you made your way to Stanford. What made you choose engineering?
You know, just like back in 7th grade, they said I was good in math. No, and then the exposure to Caltech program, I did that for about 3-4 years. Very, very, excellent. Just because you went to a school that didn't have this stuff, they gave you taught me a lot of extra STEM type curriculum. And it made me, for me, it was, I fell in love with biology first, chemistry, and then I found physics. So to me, maybe it was Caltech influence. Physics was the underlying principle that explained everything. Everything else was trivial. Was an application of physics. So for me, I really, really wanted to do physics. I wanted to be a physicist. I wanted to understand everything that put everything together. But when I got to Stanford, I started out with honors physics. And guess what? Going to a school like Stanford, even though I used to think that I beat everything, even in national competitions and all that in high school, did really well. But when coming to an institution like Stanford, had a hard time starting out in honors physics. Really struggled and said, is this for me? Do I really want to do theoretical physics and solve equations, do theory? And between the challenge as well as the just in terms of what lights a fire inside of me, I realized what I really like was I like tinkering. I've always tinkered with things. So taking physics and making something of it, which by the way, since I had nobody in the family that did engineering, I had to figure out that I think that's what engineering means, taking some science and make it work. So I decided I'm going to do electrical engineering. And you know what, that's probably, so to me, a lot of it is stumbling into things. And one of the things that I wish I had done more, and this is perhaps the problem of having too much pride or having too much the fear of showing your weakness, is to ask people. I mean, if they didn't know what engineering was, I should just be talking to more people. I should be asking, what is this, right? What do you do as an engineer? You know, I went through most of college just with, okay, I read about this, I'm going to go do that.
So the application of ideas, like the theories behind things and building things, became more interesting to you. And did you come out of school starting to build things? Like, what was that next step out of college?
Yeah, so it's also another way of describing it. I love solving problems, right? The harder the problem, I want to crack it. And engineering gave me that. First, it was just a lot of problem set and homework. But when I started when I went to school, it was a long time ago, Stanford didn't have computer science. So as a double E on the digital side, we got to do programming. I love building an HP, I think it was 300 system from ground up, where they gave you the hardware. We wrote everything together, not by myself, but 2 of us. You wrote the BIOS, you wrote the drivers, you wrote how to talk to the disk, you wrote the screen display drivers. When you're able to put a system together that, at the time when PCs were not even available, that did rendering, that did input, and that did printing or storage, it blew me away and said, you know what, I can build something that actually comes together. And then I remember also senior project, I wanted to do more. I built this little Japanese phonetic system where from the scratch, every cable, every wire, starting with chips that you type in sort of the English romanization of Japanese, and sort of it sounds out. It's the first TTS thing that I built by hand. Wow. I just love that. I love solving problems. And just to finish that story, I remember I was still very limited in my understanding of the world on what can I do with this skill, right? I'm an engineer, you go build stuff. So people ask, during interviews, they ask me, what do you want to do? I said, I want to build firmware. Oh, why? Because hardware is hardware, but I love putting the bits to make the hardware work. They go, well, why don't you do programming at the UC or Pascal? Oh, I don't trust the people who wrote compilers because they interpret what you type in and make it into bits. I want to put every 1 and 0 in there because that's what firmware does. I don't know. These are stories of how into it I was at that very, very granular level, but it was a sense of building something piece by piece, layer by layer, bit by bit. And I just love doing that.
And so what was that first job for you out of that? So like you learned all these things, you wanted to build firmware, you wanted to make a direct kind of connection to the hardware systems. Like what was the first role that you got coming out of college?
So this was mid 80s, and I was a foreign student, not that many opportunities. I did pretty well, but then I got 2 job offers. One was to go build communication systems. And then one was to sort of something came out of the blue, was a little company called Oracle. At the time, they came on campus. First time they did college recruiting. They said, we've never done this before, but we're going to take our first batch of 20 or so college students. And I didn't even know who they were, but they were one of my 2 job offers, right? What I took there was, they said, we're going to give you something a little different. We don't need you to go and build every bit. You love firmware, but we don't need you for that. We love your background, that you're international, you speak multiple languages, and we love to train you as a technically background person into something that can help us build a business globally. Now, my due diligence was asking, well, how big are you? Well, we're about, a couple hundred people worldwide, and we do about $20 million in revenue. And I said, oh, wow, that sounds great. Sounds like a lot of money that they're making, right? What did I know? And they weren't really that big at the time. One little office in Belmont, and went in, and next thing you know, 6 years later, it was a huge company. And it went from, when I was there globally, from a few hundred people. When I left, was 15,000 people, I remember.
Oh, wow. That was a massive ramp. I mean, and so it almost sounded like you kind of stumbled upon it. Not like, this was not by design, like, oh, I'm going to find a super fast growing startup, I'm going to jump right onto it. You stumbled upon it.
I was fretting. I didn't have a job. That as a foreign student, I had to go back to Taiwan somewhere because, people weren't, it wasn't easy back then. In fact, it limited my majors. I couldn't pursue, pre-med and things like that because it made it even more difficult, right? So these were the things that in some way that I think back, I struggled with at the time. I hated the fact that I had my hands tied, but you know what? I tried to make the best of it. Say, okay, I got my 2 job offers, but the Oracle one, I think I took because there was something always in me that said, if I learn something, I'm good at something, I love to pivot. I want to learn something more. I like to take what I know and maybe apply it to something else. Same way with, I love physics, let's apply it to engineering. I love languages, so let me take engineering and build a language system on it. And the same way Oracle was, let's teach you about software and also global business growth. And that hooked me, right? And that's where I was very, very lucky. I had, unfortunately, not much coaching, not much role model at the time, didn't know anybody, and really got lucky there.
And so at Oracle, going from 100 people to 15,000 people, you must have seen a massive, ramp of organization. You were relatively early in, and I'm assuming you started to get people under you, right? Because the company's growing so fast, you know so much about the business. Tell me about the first time you became like a leader or a manager in that role.
Well, it happened very quickly. So it happened within 3.5 months of joining Oracle, because they were starting to go into, I signed my contract, and between signing and going to the office in like the 2 months, they went public. So with the IPO, they decided they were going to start ramping, right? So I guess they liked the first recruit that they did from us. They started doing what's called the class up. They went back again and again to just keep recruiting people out of colleges. So within 3 months, I had a small head count of 3 or 4 people. Within 3 years, it became 20 some people. And so that's, to be honest, that once again, stumbled upon that, right? What did I learn from that? That I was not a very good manager. I was barely hanging on to my seat myself, but what I did was, okay, let me show them what I know how to do. I'm going to work harder than they do so that I solve my problem and solve their problem. That was my first way of managing, was how do I support them to make sure that they can come along. If they look good, then perhaps as a manager, I look good as well. What I didn't do well was I didn't hire fast enough. I remember my manager came to me and said, we gave you this headcount. You're not using it. That's actually going to be a problem. For me, it was like, wait, I thought I was saving us money, not for a hyper growth company. You get penalized for that, right? And the other thing I didn't do very well was I didn't know how to hire people who were better than I was. Because I hired a couple of people that were super talented, but that actually became a challenge. I felt insecure because the really, really good people end up, being in a fast growing company. They were doing different things. They were working on our stuff, working on other things. If I were a more mature and better manager, I would have supported that with the company's benefit in mind. But I was worried about my things and them spending time with other people's things. So that's an example of learning the hard way. How can I do better? So I think that I was fortunate to be given the early leadership experience, but at the same time, the mistakes actually taught me how to be a lot better. But let me backtrack a little bit, right? I was also, even though I moved around a lot, somehow I've always been interested in school groups. I've always joined school clubs, committees, and just love running for officers in these things. And I did that at business school. I did that at undergrad. I was a RATA in the dormitories. I ran a part of schools freshman orientation. That's because I love being with people. I love working as a team. But what I learned from those are in a school environment and a nonprofit environment is the leadership comes from being able to share with people why you're enthusiastic, why the purpose, why are we doing this? Because they're definitely not getting paid. And they can choose to go and study and do something else, but how do you inspire people to follow you and get to a goal with hard deadlines and getting things done? So I think I learned a lot from just doing that most of my life, and that really added to the other dimension, a part of what I'm able to maybe perhaps work well with teams and getting them to places.
Do you think that that experience in kind of like a nonprofit world, like kind of the school groups or the social groups, impacted you on the work front? Like, how did you start to like balance that out? When did you start to kind of like merge those two together? Because it sounds like when you were a first-time manager, you didn't actually manage it like a kind of a school group, and you were less inspirational, right? So when did that start to cross over for you?
It took a while. It didn't, in fact, I remember getting, call it feedback, chastised, because I was kind of a stiff, right? When I first started working, I was technically extremely capable. People called me in at all levels as the answer man to just solve problems, right? Felt very good about that. But since I didn't know much about ad management, I was a book manager. I read books, and they sent me to a couple seminars. I followed the methodology. That made me a stiff, right? It means that a stiff means that you went by the book. You got to do this, and you have to reward them. Sort of it's just no better word than stiff. It broke. I got broken down when I did startup after business school. In a startup world, I didn't have a lot of resources, and if I stayed a stiff, people probably just walk and say, "Why deal with this? This is stupid. This is stiff. This is not startup supposed to be." And also, I grew myself by wearing different hats, and then you expect other people to wear different hats. So the management style becomes, very matrix, a lot more loosely coupled, but it became more like the leadership stuff that you did in nonprofits, where limited resources, but lead by inspiration, lead by purpose, and lead by supporting one another. So I think in the startup world, the two came together for me because there wasn't a lot of bonus to give up to say, keep working hard, and I'm going to pay you with Oracle's lots and lots of profits that we made.
Right. So on the startup side, why startups? I mean, you were at Oracle. You've taken them from 100 to 15,000 employees. You were part of a rocket ship at that time. Like, what made you transition from that kind of like ecosystem to startup, like 5, 10 people?
My relatives didn't put you up to this, right? Because every get together, they ask me, why aren't you still at Oracle? You should have stayed there. Once again, it's that pivoting that I like doing. I love pivoting to learn. So even at Oracle, I went in the sort of the international group. I did some biz dev, I did tech support, I did some porting work. So this is all still very technical. But I knew that I got to have a lot of resources, learn to manage some teams and so forth. But I quickly, halfway through, I said, let me go somewhere else where I can take what I know about customers and technology. So I went to product groups. I first went to product line groups, which is taking products and serve, for example, AT&T NCR were the products that I was responsible for. And then I went into, then with product line, it was still kind of like an application of the technology. I wanted to go into the core to learn how the technology was actually built. So I went to the networking group. And I also did a startup inside Oracle, which I was fortunate to work with one of the 3 founders of Oracle to create a new business. So it's by moving around, it's taking, and they liked me because of my previous skills of in front of the customers and other things. So I gave them something, but they taught me a lot of other things. And the same way, when after business school, I could have gone back to Oracle, but I said, I need to sort of once again pivot. Let me go to a startup where I don't have, by then Oracle was probably some 20, 30, 40,000 people. I wanted to go somewhere where I can start that process again. So I went to, I kept going smaller and smaller and smaller until I had to start my own team with a couple other people. So it's all about learning. I feel like I love learning, and that's why you see me still wanting to learn cognitive science, because to me, that's what keeps me evolving or relevant and current, be able to think about new things.
Definitely. So during these kind of growth periods, were there any kind of like notable mentors or people you looked up to or people that really influenced you during this period of time of growth?
No formal mentors, which is, I'm not one to regret a lot, but I didn't know any better. I wish I had reached out to find mentors, but I didn't. Some of it goes back to, maybe the fear that it's a sign of weakness if I needed to seek help. I think that was a theme in early part of my life. I was fortunate enough to work along a lot of very, very talented and experienced people. So it's by a lot of observation and watching them, and perhaps then reaching out to sometimes encourage me, sometimes slap me around to say, that's not how you do it. I didn't do a lot of outreach. So that's where I probably didn't get the most out of it. But I was fortunate enough that people reached out to me. So I did not have any former mentors. But I thought about this too, is that's kind of hypocritical, right? But it's not that now I'm mentoring. It is precisely because I think I didn't know how to use that. I did it the long and lonely way, which is not what I think people should do. It's you can get there a lot faster. You can learn things, get new perspective a lot more sooner, as opposed to trying to figure out all by yourself. And that's one mistake I made.
So that's always a fascinating kind of like question, because I oftentimes when I think by myself, sometimes I always ask myself a very simplistic question of, if I told myself, my younger self, something, what would I tell them? And would they even listen? And it's like this funny thing. It's like, I'm pretty sure I was always surrounded by people, trying to give me advice, but I was like too thick-brained or too thick-headed, or I didn't have the ability to even understand what they were trying to tell me at that time. So, how can someone even solve that problem, you think?
So, that's maybe part of it is cultural, but part of it is the way I was shaped. I think that you go to a good school, you're on a pretty good track through school and through career. There's too much pride in that to sort of show your vulnerability. And I think later, as I got more senior, I learned to say, if I don't know it, I'm going to ask. There's nothing, because by then I also had more credibility behind me. It was safer to open up, but I wish I had done that earlier, because showing a vulnerability, showing a willingness to learn, it actually connects you better with other people. Because otherwise, you're perceived as you're always trying to figure things out, and you're probably too good for a lot of other people. And I think that's where I would say I went wrong early on in doing it my way.
It's really fascinating. I always try to kind of tell, like my mentees, like in any kind of organization or any group, that I actually learn more from them than they've learned from me oftentimes. Most people don't believe me, right? They're like, oh, no, David's just saying that. But it's really true. Like, because when you hear other people's issues, I'm like, oh, I have the same issue too. And it's just one of these funny things where by teaching, you actually learn more oftentimes, right?
Absolutely. And, since a lot of what we do together is talk about management style. So for me, I think sometimes I shock my younger teams when I first step in to say, well, I'm here to just support you. Wait, you mean you're not going to tell me or show me? And because a lot of times I go into a company to take over a team, I'm not going to know better than they do, but they expect me to come in with the answers, right? So I think this is part of that maturity of saying, I'm going to tell you, I don't know more about your business than you do. But you know what? As I learn, I'm a fast learner, and hopefully I'm a good listener. will add to sort of what you're doing, bringing along my experience and maybe my mistakes so we can avoid those. So I think that the start, whereas there is another school where you go in and you just take the army and say, this is what we need to do. We're going to charge that hill, and I know it better than all of you, so follow me. And I learned that maybe that was a stiff that I was early on. And my style has completely reversed 180 degrees. It's about being there to always ask the team, what do you need? What do you need? What do you need? I'm at a position where I can provide you with resources or just different perspectives, different ways of solving the problem. So if I can help you, we're all going to make it together.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like this idea of leadership and transitioning leadership styles is always the hardest thing, because it's usually a function of self and understanding self, right? It's like this confidence level. Once someone gets to a certain confidence level and they're leading in that way, and they know that they don't know like certain things, like they're okay with saying it. But oftentimes, I think when people are more junior in their careers, it's like I need to know everything. I need to be right all the time. That's how I build my strength, right?
Yeah. So we grow. Getting a lot of, I think where I lucked out was people were open enough to tell me what I didn't do right, what I did wasn't helpful, what I did was perhaps throwing questions that were overly critical. I saw more obstacles than sort of finding the solution or getting to somewhere. I mean, these are all the big mistakes that I learned. I mean, cause these questions I share with you because there's a twang of pain when I bring them up, because the moment when I was told that, it was hurtful. It's like, are you serious? I'm trying to do my best. No, you're not helping.
So I want to kind of focus on more of your startup career, right? So you went from large Oracle company, you decided to build smaller teams. You started really kind of becoming more of a resonant leader in some of these smaller organizations. How did you choose these startup companies? Like, was it like, I know I'm going to do this. This is going to be a big market. Like, what was that process that you went through to select these companies you decided to go to?
Well, if I knew how to do that, then I probably would only have to do one, right? Pick the right one, you're done. That's the Silicon Valley lucky story. I think when I came out of business school, the first one was a pre-IPO company called Verity. It was the search engine leader before internet search engines took off. In fact, so it was just traditional text search for corporate information systems. It was well poised. I really liked the technology because in a way, from database to search engine is sort of the next thing in a way. I really fell in love with the technology. Then there was a very inspirational CEO that was leading the company. So to me, I was drawn to it. Well, actually, the story goes longer, is that I actually got an offer from the venture firm that backed them. And at the time, I actually backed away from the venture offer to say, I don't think I know enough to be a venture capitalist. So let me go and run through the portfolios and do something. And then I can come back and sort of be the advisor I'm supposed to be, right? And that's how I chose the first one, through other people's betting. It's one of their more promising companies, saw a very inspirational leader. But later on, I think after that, my career started taking on working with people that I felt that I could work together. In other words, the first thing was trust, because parachuting into an organization, joining an organization, there's so much time spent on building that trust. You don't trust resumes when you bring people in. Resumes are always great. Interviews are always wonderful. Everybody walks on water based on what they said, right? But that trust of, can I really trust this person to do the right thing in the company? And I think I found that to be my shortcut to becoming effective very, very quickly. I look for teams that already had some mutual understanding of one another. And then with that, then I can jump in and start working right away. Because the thing that in my career, I mean, I think I didn't do anything, to be honest, spectacular. I didn't create this that became the thing that changed the world. But one thing that I've always felt really, really good about is every place I've gone into, I walk away knowing most people, not everyone, feel that I've been a person who has given everything I've got for the betterment of the company. And I always had the company before myself. I always had other people ahead of me. And I think that's a reputation of trust, reliability. Reliable gets used a lot when people talk about me. And also I'm credible. I don't overhype things. I don't undersell things. I give them to them in the right way. And I think those are the things that I learned to do very, very well. And because of that, I know that I like to work in an environment where that's almost established before I walk in, because I just want to go in and get it done.
That's amazing. I mean, like you actually don't often hear that kind of perspective because more so like this day and age. This day and age is all about self, 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 self. What is this company going to do for me? This is a stepping stone for my next thing, as opposed to like this mindset of I'm going to help build this business. Well, like, and do you think you're unique in that sense, or do you think like sentiment has shifted over time to like more of this like focus on self issue?
Um, I think it's the luxury of having perhaps, I did okay early on with Oracle and other places. So that and also with additional experience, with the right training, I always had choices, right? And when you have choices, you can be selective. And when you can be selective, I think this becomes, at least for me, very important. So I always tell people when they look at the job, whether it's from the big four tech companies that will pay you oodles of money, but I said always, I think the more important question is, who are the people that you're going to be working with around you and working for? I say that is actually over time more important, because those are the starting point of your network. Those are your reference points. And those are the points that will give you the feedback, like I got, really help you to really grow. Even at a fast-growing, high-flying environment at Oracle, I didn't learn too much in the early days when it was really rah-rah, because you can throw money at problems and solve every problem. The amount of spending was crazy. We can hire as much as we want. Whatever equipment you needed was never a question. I had like 4 computers sitting on my desk at any one time, because it was like, well, I need to do this, need to do that, just get another one, right? Those were not the learning days. When Oracle actually went through almost falling over in 1989, 1990, I think that it took that air out of the company, where a lot of people left. And people then settled down to figure out what really you need to do for the business. And this goes back to then, I think I guess we were talking about what is the realization of what's important in bringing about focus and rallying people. And I think it's through the hard times when you have limited resources. It's about focus and so forth. And that really brings things, at least for me, to a level of clarity.
Definitely. Yeah. So like, I mean, building startups is very different when you're scaling versus when you need to do a down round or when you need to lay off people. Everything, the fun stops, so to speak, and the real work then has to begin at that time. What made you shift from like the startup ecosystem, building businesses, exiting them, to investing in them instead?
Well, I had the interest. When I came out of business school, I interviewed with venture capital firms, got offers, and was almost ready to jump in. But something in me said, you're going to go put money with people, and you really haven't built a startup yourself. At least that was my philosophy. And so I did 1, 2, 3 in a row, and then the opportunities were still there. So that's the other lesson in life, is that I believe in hard work, but that everybody believes in. But I believe in always training, which means that you have to pivot and learn new things and sort of augment your tool belt. The reason for always being ready, this is like preparing for battle, be ready for it, because the opportunity, when they do come along, you want to have as many skills, as much experience as possible. So that's exactly what happened. 3 startups in a row. Some made it, some didn't make it, some did really good. I should say 1. And then my very good friend that I actually tried to recruit to Oracle, and he ended up working for my office mate. He did really well, in Oracle, building up the Oracle China business, was a huge success in Asia, and then went on to do other things and came back to start a venture fund. So we kept in touch. I mean, we're just but once again, there's a personal trust in terms of, not that we know what we did in terms of our respective businesses, but we knew that if I want to do business, this is a party that I would trust, especially in managing money, right? He came to me and said, we just started a fund and it's early and we'd love to sort of augment the team with someone like you. And I just jumped in. So once again, for me at the time was, okay, I can go back to something I wanted to do before. I've done the additional training, and I put in some hard work in learning some not to do's, and I've even having some failures, I would say. And you talked about when you're running out of money, you have to lay off the team, and in fact, shut down a company. you learn a lot about at every step, can you still turn this around? What can I do? What else can I do, right? I think those are the things where I felt better prepared to perhaps avoid those mistakes. And then getting into venture was another way for me to augment my perspective. Instead of being on the operating side, focus more on the strategic side, the governance, the guidance. And I think if I were to summarize my career, which is more or less half in operating startup growth company mode, the other half in venture and investment, the two complement each other. One is operationally, one is more strategic, and they have to work together like yin and yang. When they come together, everything works a little bit differently. They go together a lot better.
So there's always an interesting dynamic between venture capitalists and their founders, right? There's always this like ongoing friction, yet like it's a marriage. So there's like this weird dynamic that always gets created. Like, kind of, what was the most interesting things that kind of sparked your like thoughts when you shifted from founder side to the investment side?
Well, I think the most interesting thing was eye-opening was now I'm here to support other people. And this goes back to your earlier lesson. I'm meeting some phenomenal people that they're doing things, taking maybe little ideas that I thought about, but they're doing it so much better. And they have so much in-depth understanding of how to solve the problem in a 10x better way, right? So first of all, that took me back to say, I got to adjust. Stop thinking that I'm still going to be able to come up with a better idea to tell this guy what to do, or this guy or this girl. So for me, it was really to go into that support role and say, we're in the job of talent hunting. We're looking for people who are the best in what they do, and let's figure out, do we bring some additional value add, not just financial, but other ways to help me get there a little bit faster, a little bit more protected. And that's one. And the second one was it throughout this whole time as a venture capitalist, there was always the frustration sometimes being on the board. I asked you guys to do this. Why didn't we do that? Oh, I forgot. You have the right to sort of decide what you're going to do at the end of the day. At the end of the day, I'm an advisor. I have to just be hands off. And that gets frustrating sometimes. It's like, I made this mistake before.
Right. So how did you change? Like, so you're now working through people. They can take your advice, not take your advice. They've taken your money,
Right.
but they can decide what they want to do. What did you learn through this process in terms of like, you've invested in, dozens of companies, and what are some of your learning lessons? Like, what were like some of the winners, some of the losers? Was it like the original theses? Did they hold strong, or is it something like out of the blue that kind of hit?
Well, the last one is probably the easiest one to answer, is that no plan goes as planned within 3 to 6 months in startup world, whether it's the inside change or outside change, right? So that's why I look at pro formas and plans with sort of this. They're all like going to be more than 25 million in 3 years, and they all should be less than, well, in the old days, less than 500 million in 5 years, right? Because nowadays, they always give you billion-dollar numbers, but whatever. So there's a band of reasonability. So they all look alike to me as far as business plan. And it comes down to the biggest takeaway is diligence with the people, because we all know how to do due diligence with numbers and market sizing. It's not a perfect science, but you do the best that you can. But because things always change, it comes down to not just the person, but the team that you're investing in. I think the biggest risk is when the team doesn't hold together. You may have one flat tire, but the team can go on. But if the team doesn't even hold together, then the car's not going to go very far. So I think getting insight into how this team can react to adversity. And so one of the things, earlier we talked about, is it just, people talk about, is it resilience? No, it's not resilience. It's being able to take that challenge and make something of it with going beyond just keep doing the same thing, but really be able to change, and sometimes radically change, by seeing it from, because I think founders, having been there with other teams, you believe so much in what you do, it's very hard to pivot, very hard to abandon what you've already sold everybody on. This is what we're going to do, right? My whole credibility rests on this. But once again, being able to be open-minded and be able to see a new way, it may be more difficult, but if it's going to be, whereas the other one has an obstacle that's already in sight, you got to take the alternate path.
Right.
So I think it comes down to people. And to me, that goes back to, people who, it takes a lot to be a successful team. But it comes, to me, the most important factor is the people and the relationship between the people.
It's I hear that from a lot of venture capitalists all the time, right? So it's all about the people, it's about the team, have they worked together before, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Like, how do you actually kick the tires on that? Like I feel like that's something like we can easily math. Like, oh, like I've worked with Peter for a long time, we go far back, it's great. Like, how do you really kind of pressure test that?
Well, things that you learn is that when they pressure you into doing a deal within 2 weeks with due diligence, I learned that you never do that. because the presentations and the pitch and the Q&A, at the end of the day, they're all canned. They've all rehearsed it so many times. In fact, teams that worked together before, they're going to seem okay, right? But I think you really have to get under it all and really anticipate what are the kind of things that could go wrong with certain, because not every culture is fit for every kind of change. There are a lot of different variables fit teams very, very differently, right? So, and it's about just stepping back and say, let's not do the presentation. Let's just go to lunch. And there's a lot of things you pick up when they're out of their element, right? It's the way that they interact with the waiter, the waitress, the way that they tripped over someone on the way to their table. That says a lot more than the meeting, the formal handshake, and sitting there, or even having a meal together where, the proper use of this and that. It's catching people, I think, just when they're a little bit off guard and seeing the true character. You may say, these are little things, but I think from little things, you can tell a lot about a person and how they react to small things and perhaps gets amplified into bigger things.
Sure. It's like the micro expressions that you kind of like follow along with at a certain point.
Yeah.
So, like, given COVID now, how do you do that? Like, how do you track these micro expressions and microaggressions in a digital world? Like, for all you know, like I could be, naked underneath here. Like, you have no idea, right?
Well, that doesn't matter. We can still make money, depending on what kind of shorts you wear. So that doesn't matter to me. But for what I think it is harder, and also, but good thing for video. I think video does help, right? But it means spending more time. It means triangulating more. It means exploring topics that are not just about what they thought about, rehearsed 24/7. It's we can talk about a hobby. We can talk about what's happening today. I think it's by getting it away from what is rehearsed and what is day in, day out, what they think about 24/7, you start to see maybe sometimes a lot of the better side of the person, which sometimes gives you more confidence in moving forward, right? So I think it takes more work, but at the same time, I do agree. I think the diligence of just being able to walk into an office in the old days and seeing whether the office goes hush or they just keep with the noisiness of banging away on the keyboard, that says a lot about a company and its culture, right? So I think there is something that's missing, but for now, we get what we get, and hopefully we can get like something a little bit more.
So what's keeping you busy these days? Like you're advising startups. I know you're doing a lot of nonprofit work, especially with Monte, Jade. Like, what's keeping you busy kind of in this like post career kind of phase where you're kind of like doing things that you enjoy a little bit more now?
Oh, you already labeled me a post career. Okay, I'll take that as a compliment. Well, I did deliberately, and then with COVID becomes not deliberately, spend half the time with a lot of volunteer work, right? As you know, I care a lot about Mount Jade, not because I've been with it for a long time, because I think the purpose is ever more important. We're still work in progress, right? To build a community of professionals, Asian professionals in America, and what are our needs and where do we go? I think the environment's getting choppy. So there's a lot we have to do, not just economic, not just health, but from a lot of different perspectives. We really have to come together. So that's one of the things that, because at least for me, I'm thinking what we do here in building an Asian community in America has a lot of relevance for my children who are going to college. They're going to be out there in 4 years, and I got to figure this out, right? I hope to have a better world with a better infrastructure, better community going forward. Also quite involved with the schools here. I am part of the, at the local high school, as well as recently got asked to join their COVID task force at the district level. Why do I do it? Because I care, and I think there's a lot we learn. I'm learning a lot from the business world in terms of what people are doing with COVID. But then even taking that same framework and methodology and trying to apply it to schools, to the public school district, it is difficult because your constituencies are labor, parents, teacher, labor meaning there's all the support staff as well, and then and just everybody, and students most importantly, right? The problem is so much more difficult than what we do in companies. So I'm learning, and because of that. So those are the kind of the volunteer work, which I enjoy quite a bit. But I'm also, very light on the startup advisory right now. But at the same time, because I'm trying to carve out as much time as I can, there is I think it's still a skunkwork project working on trying to build a knowledge network, because I think that's just it's where my career. I started out by chance into storing information at Oracle. I did a lot of work in search engines, which is to find things in unstructured ways. And then I took that into a lot of application space where it's taking that stored data and making good use of it. And I think we're at the cusp of doing a lot more with it, data, machine learning, and AI. But that's kind of the automated part of it. I think there's a lot that's going on that needs to be captured, whether it's midterm, short term, but I think it's like longer term than that is. I think the human brain is wired in a very, very different way in terms of our knowledge repository and knowledge retrieval. That part of the sort of the strong AI, we're still way, way, way far off on that. And until that's there, which is a long ways away, the ability for us to use human as a part of this knowledge network on top of a very smart infrastructure of data and machine learning, there's a lot of opportunities there. I think, it's sort of like the old business process engineering. How do you put more human information into automation? We're doing it more advanced than that, but I think there's a lot more. This is kind of what me and my partners, we're looking at this is what we've been trained to do all our life. It's a hard problem, so I can't say we're fully into it yet, but I think it's a fun problem to go after.
It sounds like it's pretty consistent in terms of your entire career, solving super complex problems.
I'm a sucker for that, definitely.
That's fantastic. I know, you mentioned a lot of about like Asian, Asian impacts for the Asian community. I know you're very passionate about that. What have you seen kind of in your kind of history? Like where do Eastern values in a Western society really shine? Like I feel like that's kind of like where we all try to operate within.
Yeah. Well, I think I probably had to learn different ways, because I tried to be Asian when I was young, and I tried to be all Western. There was a period in my life where I said, if I'm going to survive in this country, I got to just flush out everything that's Asian inside of me to try and integrate better. So having gone back and forth a couple of times, you want me to highlight sort of what are the Asian values? The Asian values are, in a way, it goes to the grit, the perseverance part, right? But I think doing that alone is not a merit. It's actually, it holds you back. Because I think, at least the way I started in my career was, I thought if I work hard, people will recognize it, just keep working harder. I mean, when I started working, I used to go to the office at 7 something. I don't leave until about 1 a.m. And I go home for a quick sleep and I come straight back. And I'm the only person in the office usually after about 7 p.m., right? And this is even in a high growth phase of a startup-like company. I think that's part of my sense of perseverance, resilience, and just call it dedication. A lot of it comes from, I think, partly is that Asian value of super work ethic, which I don't know if it's healthy. But I think that part of it is also where I had to learn to grow up from that. I think hard work is a part of it, but you also have to work smart, right? And this is something that we preach a lot to the younger people that we work with is we say you got to be a great listener, and then you have to become a good, apply a lot of critical analytics or thinking, and then be an effective communicator. I think I was overly focused on being a great thinker and analytics person. I was also a great listener in taking in the problems, but I wasn't good in communicating back to say, should I be doing this? or even the analysis part to say, is it best for me to just slog another 7 hours into this problem, or should I back it up and work with other people or have other people do their part, then we can all move forward at a better pace, right? Instead of just me putting more hour backfilling. I think that's, well, sorry, I went from a plus to sort of a minus, but that's sort of my grow up experience, right? But to answer the question, what I found hard about this is that you got to do things that the mainstream does appreciate. And hard work they do appreciate. So you have to do that to some extent. But I think what's more important though is there was a time when, during my venture time, when my understanding of the cross-cultural element, especially in dealing and assembling teams across the Pacific, doing deals across the Pacific, there's some very unique perspectives, right? Whether it's just the etiquette or the cultural understanding. And that's what you bring to the table, because I think you have to bring something to the table that's of value to the other side. So during the globalization and expansion of business between the continents, the Asian sort of way of doing things, just knowing it and knowing how to operate in that is of tremendous value. Nowadays, even though we talk about decoupling, we talk about perhaps more isolated and more just decoupling is the word, right? I think that there's even more need for that, because it's about doing it in a diligent and still a smart way, because ultimately no country can live without any other major countries now. And yes, the environment says that we have to check ourselves and rebalance certain things, but if anything, that bridge becomes more complex and more sophisticated. And that takes not just, I've been to China 3 times, I have some Chinese friends, I can do business there. It takes a deep, deep understanding of both where we were and why we're here now, and how do we go forward from here. So I think, if anything, this bicultural, the ability to think differently, and the structures are very different, both in terms of how you think about problems and how you do things, how you say things. And that bridge becomes ever more important. So I think this East-West marriage and intermingling thing is going to be even more important than ever before.
So moving forward, I mean, like, how do we as a Asian community kind of bond together closer to support some of these initiatives? Like, I mean, this is something that I've been passionate about. I know you've been passionate about this as well, but here in Silicon Valley, we have 36 Asian American trade associations. I mean, Monte, Jade is one of them. Our counterparts, Tycon, have one. Mm-hmm. It's not an end all be all kind of like model, but I mean, like, how do we bond together closer as an Asian community to support one another, and your thoughts on that?
Well, once again, people come together when there's a need, right? And I think that perhaps the message of, I'll use the word decoupling, is going to hit a lot of businesses. It's going to be difficult as we transform. But the difficulty teaches us a lot more about the appreciation for, why did you couple in the first place? So how do we decouple and then recouple in a more productive and yet comfortable way for both sides? So I think, so getting back to the question, how do we bring people together? It first comes to recognizing the need, that we all have to be aware that we all have a role to play here. And if we disregarded this role, this responsibility as Asian or Chinese in America, that we have a big, big part to play in moving this forward, things are not going to get better. Things will probably just go meander and get lost for a much longer time. So I think first is recognizing that we have to come together. And then for us, you and I have been talking a lot about, how do we articulate that message so we can bring people together? This need shouldn't be just one that's about concerns or things are getting difficult. It should be about, but beyond that, how can we make it better? Because, I was very fortunate. I mean, I think you too, right? You look back at the last 20 years, this Asia-US bridge has been phenomenal, from whether it's business, cultural, and just coming together, the exchange. There's so much good that comes out of that. And we have to sort of find those elements and rebuild the bridge and make it better. And I think that's the purpose of our community. We have to do our part on this side so that we can bring everybody on this side together with everybody on that side. We have a big responsibility.
How do you think our community members should be thinking about how they can get involved in things? Like, what would your call to action be, and what would you say to motivate them to take action?
Well, I think I hope that they are doing some deep thinking about, just being Asians in America, right? What is our position? Where are we going? Where is this all heading? I think that we're hearing a lot of noise, a lot of messages that are confusing. So if anything, at a minimum, we need to sort of be more engaged and also help fix that message to say, we are a part of, let's just say, we are all Americans here. We may have Asian heritage, but as Americans, this is why we belong. There are things that we do that are similar, but there are things that we do that are different. But the things that we do different, if anything, if you look at the American heritage, it's always been additive. It added to it. So we have to amplify that message so that our belonging will make more, we have more of a sense of belonging. I think it's easy to say, I live here, I work here, I belong here. I think that's part of the confusion. The message is not clear enough. A lot of people will not accept that as you are here. So I think we have to all first come together, realize, figure out our role, and really just make a better world. Because I mean, Dave, you and I talk about this, is that if they're not looking, go to the sites. Ascend has a lot of information on this, on upwards mobility of Asian Americans in leadership positions. Now, I think part of the problem I'll state is that we're all very comfortable. We can all make pretty good living just to be an engineer, be a manager, maybe even be a director. It's a great living in Silicon Valley if you're in the right companies, right? But you know what? If that's all you get to have, or if that's all our future descendants will have, that or even less, is that the kind of picture we want? So maybe that's just wishful thinking on my side, but I hope that we can all look at these numbers and say, we're truly a minority even among the minorities. Mm-hmm. So if we don't think about how we're going to help ourselves, people are going to just go straight over us, right? I mean, I think there are a lot of very important racial issues that are being discussed, but you know what? We're falling in the cracks. We don't make up the numbers, and people really don't care about us in some ways because there are bigger issues at hand with larger populations. So I think that we really have to come together and say, even though we're a small group, we are part of a larger group. How can we come together and make this whole thing better for everyone that's involved?
That's fantastic. Any final thoughts before we go to Q&A?
Final thoughts? I have so many thoughts. Well, no, I think that just sharing stories, right? I think coming to America and then making the difficult decision to stay was like a dream. It was like everything sounded so good. Everything was going to just work out great. And I was very fortunate. There were many, many challenges which presented learning opportunities for me. Put your head down, work hard, build yourself a great network of people. So I was going to say, what's important for me was I felt that what I did right was to build this reputation that when I join a team, a group, a community, I'm here for the team, the group, the community. It's less about myself. When I do that, I think people put their trust in me. I build credibility, and I build a reliability reputation. And that has always propelled me ahead to be able to choose what I want to do next, because that referral is so important, right? So I encourage everybody to embrace that mindset. Yes, we all have to think about, is this a good company? Is it going to go on and do great things? But think about how you're going to play that role, not just what the company will do for you, but what can I do for the group of people I'll be working with? So, I mean, for me, that's been, and that now transfers from the corporate world to the nonprofit world. I think it's about working with other people and working well, and then building that relationship, building that trust. That has made me, that's the fulfillment in my life. And I want to leave that as a very positive message for everybody to think about.
That sounds fantastic. We've got a question from Faye here. What advice would you give to others in this time of COVID, elections, and global events?
Stay calm. And, well, actually, I think that this is probably the most challenging time that I've seen in all my years in Silicon Valley. And I've seen the internet bubble. I've seen a couple of financial crises. I've seen quite a few things. But this one, I think the impact is significant. It hits us in all the different ways. So first, it's important to stay safe. Stay safe doesn't just mean, health-wise, but I say a big part is staying mentally healthy. That's part of being safe. You can get pretty caught up in everything that's happening. And you can even be thinking you're working really hard to preserve a lot of things or help a lot of things. But the thing you always have to look in to make sure that you're also taking care of your mental balance. Because I think this is something that's going to the longer this goes, it just eats away in our core, deep under, something without us realizing it. So I think staying safe physically and mentally. I think it's also about being able to, this is an environment where we have no fixed formula. I definitely don't claim to be someone who has a way out. But there's a method to approach this, which is stay tuned to the changes. Observe what's happening. Take that in, make a plan. We always have to have a plan. But in COVID type environment, you have to keep getting more data and revise that plan constantly. And this goes for your family life, your work life, and your other things that you want to do, because these are times where we have to be agile. We have to always be looking at new inputs. And that's the way we're going to navigate through this, because things are going to change constantly, hopefully for the better, but they're going to change. But in other words, for lack of better use of, change is the only thing that's constant. It's ever more true right now. And there's no way to do anything about it except to stay on top of it.
Great. Audience members, if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or the Q&A segment. Peter, I've got some other questions for you too. Is how do you, like, when you talk to your daughters about the future of America, their careers, like, how do you inspire them to do more, to be more active? Like, what is some of your kind of philosophies on that front, especially for the next gen?
Well, I think one thing is that now that they're old enough, I don't sugarcoat too many things. So maybe I'm a cruel parent that way. Because I want to talk about things, especially with ones that are leaving the home, that we face facts. These are the facts that are out there. But in building them up, I think I try and just build, first and foremost, we have to have a dialogue. As parents and children, we'll have our friction from time to time. Knock on wood. So far, the last 6 months have been reasonably okay, being cooped up together. But I think regardless, even before this whole thing, to me, I realized that we're all different people and different things may happen. Whatever happens, the most important thing is that we have a channel that's always open. And beyond the channel is that they know that I am here, not just lip service, but I'm here to really have their interest in mind. No judgment. I'm here to fully support. So whatever issues, hopefully, we haven't done as much of it so far because they're teenagers. I hope that they can come and bring their questions. We solve a lot of career and school kind of, call it business-like questions. We have those conversations, but I hope it can be more than that. Right? So this is being just, I think once again goes back to having a relationship, because even with kids that are growing up, they're going to change. And the relationship will always change, but the dialogue and that trust has to be in place. Then I think we can sort of come together, go apart a little bit, but always come back together and do things together. Less and less in terms of, well, actually, with 18-year-old, it's already flipped that there's nothing that I dictate. Actually, we started a little bit earlier than that. She's pretty strong-minded, but it's about me always being able to be a good advisor to her. And hopefully that's where I've had some training in that, and I can convince her that I can help her in that way too.
Well, fantastic. Well, Peter, I want to thank you very much for coming out on finally a beautiful Saturday afternoon. I want to thank our audience members for attending during this Saturday afternoon as well, and taking the time from your great weekend to join us as well. I look forward to seeing you in future events, Peter. Thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome, David. It's always a pleasure to talk to you and to talk to the Monte community. And hopefully, there's some entertainment and some good stories, and we'll be talking more going forward.
Great. I'm going to wrap up with a little bit of logistics here. Just as a few reminders for everyone, our mentorship program will be starting pretty shortly. I believe our first workshop is in October. Again, if you have anyone that that is interested or wants to participate, please let us know. We'll see if we still have opportunity to slot you guys in at this current time. We have a couple of new events coming down the line. On October the 3rd is our first workshop for our mentorship program. We're holding a wireless communications forum on investments. We will have representatives from ARM and Acer speaking at that event. On the 17th, we'll be doing a board-of-board interview with Jesse Shaw, former chairman of Natia and founder of AgilePoint. We will then be doing a board-to-board interview with Carol Carpenter, CMO of VMware. We'll be doing then mentorship workshop 2. And then we have 2 more interview series, one with Wen Shay, Kleiner Perkins general partner, and then also Guang Li, the managing director out at TransLink Capital as well. Last but not least, thank you to our sponsors, Venture Pack Law, Deloitte, Silicon Motion, New York Life, and Most. We look forward to seeing everyone in our next event. Thank you. Have a great weekend, and stay safe out there.